Hey, this is Antonio King, and today we're going to discuss Jesus, the tithe, and Melchizedek. Hmm. Now, if you like this type of teaching, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment. And also, you can share this. All right, let's get into the teaching. In the book of Genesis, the 14th chapter, starting with verses 17 through 20, we have the account of Abram coming back from a battle. It was a glorious battle. It was a victorious battle. He was victorious. He smacked him around. And he goes back to where he was living, and he runs into the king of Sodom. And this dude tries to start talking trash, but Melchizedek shows up, and the king of Sodom just gets really, really quiet. Melchizedek shows up, and he brings two things. And he brings bread and wine. And he blesses Abram in the name of the Most High God, El Elyon. He does. And he tells Abram, nice victory. But it wasn't because of your strength or your military prowess. It was because the Most High God put your enemies in your hands. Because let's face it, you had 5 kings and all their men. They couldn't defeat these 4 kings. But Abram, with just over 300 people, just knocked these guys out. It was because of El Elyon, the Most High God. And remember, El Elyon, how it's spelled is, the first L represents God, Elohim. But Elyon is spelled Ayin Lamed Yud Vav Nun. And I know a lot of people are like, dude, this, whatever. But it represents what Christ is going to do in the future. Ayin is knowledge. Lamed is teaching. A Yod is a hand. A Vav is an L. A Nun is an air. And it just lets you know that the knowledge and teaching of the hand and the nail, which points to the cross, is going to come through the air. Not air as we breathe, but like the descendant, that type of air. That's the name Melchizedek gives to Abram, and that's who he blesses him through. Remember, he brings bread and wine, and Abram pays a tithe. And for many of us, we think a tithe is, we shouldn't have to do it, because that was Old Testament. The tithe was part of the law. This is before the law. It is. And the thing of it is, there are people that are saying we shouldn't be doing tithing because they were tithing crops and animals. We work. We don't have crops and animals like that. Only farmers should do that. Really? Okay, so the deal with the animals and everything, a tithe that was your very best. Every animal, every coin, any grains, they all represent one person. That is the Messiah himself. That's what the tithe represents. So if you're holding back your money from your church because you're mad about some preacher, I ain't giving him my money. If you're worried about the church taking your money, pay attention to what the tithe represents. And if you don't want to pay your tithe, that's between you and God, because it specifically represents the Messiah. Like I said, every animal and every sacrifice, everything represented the Messiah. That's why they couldn't be defective. They couldn't have broken lambs and everything. And even when the temple came towards the New Testament, they would exchange either their crops or something for an animal, or they would exchange money that they had for an animal so they could have the proper sacrifice. Every sacrifice, every tithe, everything symbolized who the Messiah was going to be. So get past your little hang-ups with that. So when Abram pays the tithe, he is pointing to the fulfillment that's coming. Because with Melchizedek, he has two offices. Because remember, Melchizedek's name means priest of righteousness, and he was the king of Salem, meaning the king of peace. So he's a righteous king, and where he reigns is peaceful. So when Melchizedek shows up with the bread and the wine, it's the picture of salvation, and he offers this. And this is a foreshadowing of the thing that the Messiah is going to do at the cross. It is. And like I said, the tithe that Abram gives is a foreshadowing of the fulfillment of what the Messiah is going to do. And if you think I'm just making stuff up, let's go to the Last Supper. The Last Supper. This is where it was a Passover Seder. It was Passover. You can look in the scriptures, and this is after they've eaten the lamb. Jesus takes a bread and he blesses it. There are Jewish prayers that deal with all of this. He blesses the bread, and then he breaks it. And he does the same thing with the wine. And he tells the disciples, this bread is my body that's going to be broken for all of you, for everybody. And this is my blood. And it's the blood of the new covenant that's going to be shed for you. And he's foreshadowing, he's telling you what he's going to do, but it hasn't been fulfilled yet. So what Melchizedek shows is what the Messiah is going to go through, but it won't be fulfilled unless it comes through the line of Shem. That's the way it is. And you know who's through the line of Shem? Abram. And when Abram hands Melchizedek his tithe, he is saying that the one that comes from me, because I'm giving this to you, the one that comes from me is going to be the fulfillment, because he's going to be the tithe. He's going to be the fulfillment of what El Elyon means. And remember, later on, you'll find out that when Melchizedek walks away and Abram is talking with the king of Sodom, Abram calls God by the title, El Elyon, and he also calls him by his covenant name, Yud He Vav He, Jehovah. That's what Abram does. So when you look at the Last Supper, it is Jesus saying, I'm getting ready to, my body's going to be broken. I'm going to die. But I'm going to get up from the grave. This is my body that's been broken. That's how he breaks the bread. And then he says, this cup of wine is my blood. It represents how I'm going to bleed. Remember, Melchizedek has two offices. He's a king and he's a priest. And they haven't been fulfilled at the Last Supper. They are fulfilled at the cross. Because the one who's coming through the lineage of Shem, through Abram, isn't just some random guy. Because that's what we think sometimes. We think anybody could have got up there and taken that pain for us. No. So when they charged Jesus with his crimes, they placed above him a placard saying what he was guilty of. They say he's guilty of being the king of the Jews. Oh, man. And remember, Jesus is from the order of Melchizedek. And who is Melchizedek? He's the king of righteousness. And he's also the king of Salem. the king of Jerusalem. He's the king of he's the king of the Jews. His kingdom. And before we go any further, there are always people saying that Melchizedek was Shem. He was not. Because we know exactly when who Shem's parents were, and we know when he died. Because the Bible gives you that. And in this place, the place where Melchizedek is reigning, are the descendants of Ham. Come on, y'all. So, Melchizedek is a king and a priest. So, as a king, he's the king of the Jews. That's who Jesus represents. And as a priest, he's going to offer a sacrifice. But as a descendant of, this is Jesus, as a descendant of Abraham, or Abram, because he's the tithe, he's going to offer himself as the sacrifice. He's the only one that can offer the sacrifice and be the sacrifice at the same time. That's Jesus. He is the fulfillment of everything you see when you look at Melchizedek and Abram. Because it's Jesus the tithe and Melchizedek. How could he be so sweet? Because he's the foreshadowing of a lot of things. Remember, even the first fruit offerings have to be a specific way. So when Jesus dies on Passover, he was the offerer and the offering. Because he was the perfect sacrifice. So you have, and 3 days later, and I know people are trying their best to come up with some new mathematical thing and say that he died on Friday. Jesus had to be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. Because he says it. You can't say that he's just making stuff up or he was just talking like we do. It's 3 days and 3 nights. So when he gets up on Sunday, and this is one of the reasons why we we worship on Sundays, is because he got up. And you'll have people saying, so what about the Sabbath? He's the Lord of the Sabbath. He was healing the sick and raising the dead on the Sabbath. He got up on a Sunday. And you know where that's found? It's found in the Old Testament. It says, the Sunday after Passover is the day of first fruits. And you know a first fruit offering is a tithe. That's when the priest would offer God the first ripened grain. And you know what happened on the day that Jesus got up from the grave? In Matthew, it talks about when the graves were opened, you had people that had been dead got up and walked around. As a first fruit offering to show you that if they got up, then we're going to get up. Jesus was the tithe. He was. He's also the picture of Melchizedek. So you got Jesus performing all these things. He speaks to his disciples on Passover and says, I'm going to die. I'm going to shed my blood. That morning, he's hung on a cross. He's crucified. He doesn't die until 3 o'clock. When the last sacrifice, the evening sacrifice, is given. This is all Old Testament. but it was fulfilled through the Messiah. That's why Paul calls Jesus the first fruit of the dead. He's the first in preeminence. He's the first one to do it. Not only does he get up, he brings others with him. And I thought about something. If you go forward, you know Elisha, not Elijah, but Elisha, the one that came after. When he died, remember they had a funeral and they were putting somebody's body in the same tomb as Elisha's bones. And they said the dead man's body touched Elisha's and he was resurrected. Now these were just the bones of Elisha. And that man lived. What do you think Christ did? He got up out the grave, and Old Testament saints got up with him. And I know somebody's going to be like, well, I don't know about that. It's in Matthew. And you know who else got up with him? That thief on the cross. The one that says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He had a choice. He met the priest and the king. Melchizedek calls God El Elyon, which signifies what the Messiah is going to be, who he is. That he's going to be an heir. Heir of what? And then when Abram, not only does Abram call God by his covenant name, he also calls him by El Elyon, the possessor of heaven and earth. Because that knocks everybody else out the box. Both of them call God the same thing, the possessor of heaven and earth. He just doesn't own it. It originates with him. He's the creator. Not only does he create everything, it also means that he can buy things back, and he's the Redeemer. I don't know if y'all pay attention to the words in the Bible, because this blew me away. I just thought being possessor means you just owned it. That's it. But it deals with so much more. It originates with him. He created it. He can redeem it. He can redeem people. He's the possessor of both heaven and earth. All this shows what the Messiah is going to do on behalf of all of us. Jesus, the tithe, and Melchizedek. God is awesome. The foreshadowing of Melchizedek in the Old Testament is the fulfillment through Christ in the New Testament. And you will see the King of righteousness and the King of Salem at the Millennial reign. When Christ comes back and he reigns for 1,000 years. Because he's going to reign in the order of Melchizedek. This isn't like the thing that Aaron does. Christ is going to reign as priest and king. We need to be ready. And if you keep reading, you'll find out that people have to bring offerings in the millennial reign. You know what's so surprising about people talking about we shouldn't have to pay tithes? They obviously don't read their Bibles. Because in the millennial reign, you got to bring offerings. A tithe. Because if you don't bring him if you don't bring him what he's due, he will hold back the rain. And if you don't get rain in its season, you can't live because your crops will die. Jesus, the tithe, and Melchizedek.